In Nairobi and around the world, a lot of informal settlements are along rivers. People who live along rivers are more prone to things like flood risk, also more prone to poor sanitation if you're living in an informal settlement. And chiefly, of course, those two things can bring about disease. And in times of flooding, you're talking about also destruction of property, sometimes really sad issues about being washed away by the river, for example. Kibera is the largest, arguably, informal settlement in Nairobi, about 300,000 people, give or take. And what we do there is we work with residents and partner with them to turn waste spaces into public spaces. The challenge you have in places like Kibera is that there are vulnerable populations who need to have somewhere to live. You know, the coalface of Nairobi is the residents of places like Kibera. The guards, the cleaners, the factory workers, that's where they live. That's how they move from place to place. So a good example is residents we've been working with who are right by the Nairobi Dam, which is in the southeast part of Kibera. And the dam used to be a source of water, as a reservoir for the city, and is now a very heavily polluted space. And you find people who are living in and around that particular area, and they're living there because the rent is cheaper. They're living there because they need to have better access to other parts of Nairobi. For us who are working with residents, it's a very direct conversation. But when you look at things like the Paris Accord and you look at some of the work that the UN Habitat has been doing with the new urban agenda, those conversations are starting to talk more about communities and the communities that are facing these impacts. 60–70% of the world will be urban by 2030, so we cannot ignore those residents, especially if those 60–70% of urban, the majority are living in informal settlements. So we can talk about the theory of what it means, or really start to think about how people are being impacted and how to build differently for residents like those. And interacting with residents in informal settlements would be ensuring that they're around the table when these conversations happen. So it'd be really wonderful if the type of justice that is being spoken about regards to climate really takes into consideration the experiences of residents of informal settlements.